The two-party system in the United States, plurality voting, and the lack of strong third parties. As a political scientist, my discussions with friends or neighbors seem to always turn to politics. Many of these discussions uncover frustrations about the bitterness that occurs between Democrats and Republicans. Why can't they just get along, they ask. Or, I'm an independent voter. Why can't there be a powerful third party that represents a more moderate voice? I tell them that it is because of the rules. Rules dictate outcomes. But most folks don't understand what I mean. They insist that a third party will eventually gain power and help change our two-party system that has created such a nasty political climate that results in very little compromise. I tell them that a third party will never gain significant power in the United States. I guarantee it, because of the rules. Many Americans believe that the U.S. has a two-party system simply because of history and tradition. Indeed, that has been the history of the American political system. The early battles between the Federalists and the Anti-Federalists concerning state versus federal power carried on into the Civil War, the Civil Rights Movement, and it is still being debated today. However, that is not the reason why a third party will never take power. The key is winner-take-all plurality voting. So what is plurality voting? Well, first let's look at majority voting. A presidential candidate needs a majority of electoral college votes, that is 50% plus 1, to win the election. Because there are 538 total electoral votes, divided by 2, plus 1 equals 270, it takes 270 electoral votes to win. But a candidate only needs a plurality of votes to win all of the electoral votes in a state. What is a plurality? It simply means more votes than anyone else. For instance, if there were 6 candidates all vying for one congressional seat, 5 of the candidates could gain 16% of the vote, while the 6th candidate would gain 20% of the vote. So, with only 20% of the vote, that candidate would win the single seat. That is plurality voting. So why don't we have 6 candidates running for office every year? The answer can be easily found using a bell curve. Many voters consider themselves as largely moderate on the political continuum. As you move further from the center, fewer people identify with the more extreme political views. Using our 6 candidates, we can place them on the political spectrum. Candidate A might believe that healthcare should be nationalized and that most industry should be government-run. This might be a Ralph Nader. Candidate B might believe in privatized systems, but with much government control and a large social safety net. This might be a Nancy Pelosi. Candidate C believes that government and business can work together, but there should be a progressive tax code and a moderate social safety net. This might be Barack Obama. Candidate D believes that a social safety net should exist, but that government should not stifle the growth of business with too many taxes or regulations. This might be a Mitt Romney. Candidate E believes that government is too big and that taxes and regulations must be severely reduced. This might be John Boehner. And candidate F believes that government should have very little power and only limited responsibilities. This might be a Ron Paul. I have added an imaginary percentage of the votes that each candidate might receive. At first, this might seem more representative for voters, because those candidates would represent a more narrow political platform. But who would win this vote? With plurality voting, candidate D would win the election with 30% of the vote. Can you imagine what more liberal candidates might think to do? Candidates B and C would say, hey, our views are pretty similar. Maybe we could compromise on some issues and have a single candidate represent them. They would join forces in the next election and win, with 45% of the vote. But of course, after losing that election, candidates D and E would think the same thing. They would compromise and join forces, and win, with 47% of the vote. The two big parties would eventually be left vying to represent all of their conservative or liberal constituents while also trying to retain their more moderate ones. Does this mean that third parties have never existed? Of course not. Consider now that we have candidates A and B, or really, the Democrats and the Republicans. They are both battling to gain the support of the few moderate voters in the middle of the spectrum. But some elements of their party might think that they have become too moderate and form a third party. This has been seen recently in the form of the Tea Party. They gained a strong enough voice that it forced Republicans to embrace more conservative views. This left room for Democrats to garner more of the moderate votes. Republicans lost some key senatorial seats in 2010 and are now moving back to the center. Because, what good does it do a conservative voter to maybe be more accurately represented if the candidate loses? This has been seen in many presidential elections that include a third-party candidate. In 1992, Ross Perot may have stolen enough votes from George Bush that Bill Clinton was able to win. In 2000, Ralph Nader might have stolen enough votes from Al Gore and John Kerry in 2004 that George W. Bush won. And Ron Paul might have stolen enough votes from John McCain in 2008 that Barack Obama won. The same is true for the more moderate independent party candidates. As the parties adjust their policies and become more extreme to gain votes, independent candidates may gain power for a short time. However, that forces both parties to be more moderate. This cycle ebbs and flows as candidates race to the edges so as to not lose the base of their party, and then return to moderate views as the other party acquires those votes. This is why there will never be a third party that gains significant power, because as they take votes from one of the two parties, those parties will respond to get those votes back. Thus, the rules of winner-take-all plurality voting will always leave America with a two-party system.